First, I'll apologize for the weather outside. Was not planning to have a smoky day like this, but hopefully you can see enough of the park to get a sense of what we've done here. I know Matt gave you a primer on the way over, so I will probably be repeating a bunch of what he said, and if you guys are bored, just give me one of these and I'll speed things up. But I'm just going to talk you through a little bit about how we came to own and develop this site and its history, and then I'll hand it over to our partner Bill here to discuss a little bit about the active marketing and the building of the site. So this site, I'm sure Matt gave you a little bit of context, but it's been in industrial work for over a century. It started out as a receiving area for buffalo bones, and they would process the buffalo bones in the late 1800s into phosphates for fertilizer. It grew into a mix of uses over the century and ultimately was used partially by Chemours for a chemical dye manufacturing facility, and the area we're standing on right now was owned by GAF and was used to produce shingles. And GAF is the largest roofing manufacturer in North America, at least, if not the world. The site was shut down about 30 years ago, a little bit longer than 30 years ago, because of the amount of contamination that accumulated on here from the previous uses. And the previous users spent a lot of time and a lot of money working with various agencies, including the DEP, to work through a remediation plan for the site. So when we stepped in, a lot of the remedial work was in process or already completed, and that allowed us to get to the developable site much quicker. It did take us quite a bit of time to start building here. There was still a lot of work that we needed to do, but some of the examples of some of the environmental controls on site, obviously we're on top of the cap right now that will cap the site along with all the landscaping and pavement around the area. There is groundwater contamination beneath us, and in order to contain that, there's basically a giant underground bathtub that surrounds the entire site to keep the water in the site, as well as active pumps and monitoring wells around the exterior to make sure that that water doesn't commingle with any of the active waterways around us. I think we're just enormously proud of the fact that this site sat vacant for so long because of the environmental conditions, and we were able to step in at a time and really finish the process and bring this back to something that the township, first of all, can be extremely proud of, and second of all, supplies a lot of tax revenue and a lot of jobs to the town. It's really important to this town. This site is very important to the logistics network of the Northeast, but specifically to Linden. This site was one of the largest employers in the town for a very, very long time. And when it shut down, a lot of people lost their jobs. We estimate somewhere between 3,000 or 4,000 people were working here at its peak. And all those jobs went away and they didn't come back while the site was vacant. This is also, if you live in Jersey, one of the most visible sites. We get some of the most traffic, the most eyeballs on this site of any site in Jersey. We've got the turnpike right behind me here. We've also in the direct flight path of Newark Airport. You hear the planes flying overhead now. So not only do we get eyes on the ground, we get eyes from the sky, eyes from across the river. So this is a showpiece, not only for us, but for the town of Linden, for the state of New Jersey, for the port of Newark. We're extremely proud of what we've built here. And I'll let Bill take over and talk a little bit about, the challenges we had in building this and what types of leases we signed, what types of tenants are attracted to this site. Thanks.
So thanks, David, and thank you to all of you for taking the time out of your day and, part of the NAIOP Icon event, signing up for the bus tour to come down here and see our project in Linden. My name is Bill Bumber, and I'm with Advanced Realty Investors. So the partnership here is Advanced Realty Investors, Greek Development, we're the co-developers on the site, and then Prudential is our equity partner. But I'd be remiss without saying thank you, number one, to our biggest partner here, which is the City of Linden. And I want to thank all the representatives, including the mayor, for stopping by here today and being a part of this tour and coming to see the finished project and being a part of our success here. We couldn't do it without your help, absolutely. So talking a little bit about the Linden Logistics Center, I'm sure Matt got into some of the detail about the constructability and what's here and how and why. So a big part of this is not only just building the buildings, but getting them put up, building the right product, utilizing our resources, which is whether that's the industrial community, whether that's our brokers, our engineers, our architects, our consultants. It takes an army to put a project like this together. So in give or take around 2019 is when the serious earthwork started at this project, and that's when we began our active marketing campaign for the Linden Logistics Center. We started with an initial phase, which is a 480,000 square foot building that way, and an 840 back there. That was part of phase one, which we leased up to World Distribution Services, third-party logistics company, and Peloton, whom all of you probably know, and that's where we're heading next on this tour. We're gonna get a look inside their warehouse. After that, we moved into phase three, which you're standing in one of the buildings, which makes up, this is our building C, 472,000 square foot rear loader. We built building D and building H as part of phase two. Phase three, the final phase, is building 100 and 200. Right now, our only vacancy in the park is 1, 2, and 3, which we're actively trying to market right now to users that are out in the industrial marketplace. Part of all of this is working alongside of Greek Development, our construction team, to come up with the design is what you saw. They had to construct for us that flyover, that bridge that you guys came in and drove across to get into the park. There was a major, the Chemical Coastline runs parallel to the New Jersey Turnpike, and that could have blocked access at any given point to the site. So what they do, they built a bridge. So that's how access serves this site, and that's how we leave this site open 100% of the time to all the traffic and all of our tenants that are in here. You look at the city of Linden, you look at the location, its proximity to the ports. It's no doubt that, as an effect of all the supply chain issues we had during COVID, there was a tremendous backlog. That allowed us to do a deal with Samsung, which we put in 735,000 square foot building in the back, building H, about 2 months, start to finish. From the day that Samsung first showed up to tour the site to an executed lease in 2 months. So again, it just speaks to the quality of the product that's here, the location, the tenant mix, the partnership we have with Linden. One of the things that is very difficult to do right now, given supply chain issues that we're all still struggling with, is get a tenant in. Name of the game is speed to occupancy in our business. So a tenant shows up, they start looking at these buildings. We build approximately 3,000 square feet of speculative office like you see behind you, which allows us to secure a TCO, which allows a tenant, we can go from the time that we're engaged with a tenant to lease executed to handing them the keys within a matter of days. So it was something that the city of Linden has partnered with us to do that actually helps us to occupy this park and provides, we would say, a market advantage to some of our competition. But overall, that's just a very, very brief overview. Whatever you learned on the bus, from David, from myself, that's the Linden Logistics Center. Feel free to take a walk around the building. We're gonna head over to Peloton here momentarily. And I guess at this point, would ask if there are any questions that haven't been answered.
Yeah, and I just want to shout out to the mayor who's sitting right up front here. Thank you for attending. And like Bill said, we couldn't have done it without your help. New Jersey is notorious for it being difficult to get approvals in and taking a long time. And like I alluded to, it took us some time to get the approvals here because we were dealing with multiple state agencies. But dealing with the Township of Linden was the best part of the process for us, because we shared a vision for this site in terms of getting it back into production, getting it back into a taxable base for the town, and bringing jobs back to the town. So when that happens and visions align, everything worked out well, I think, on both sides of the equation. So thank you again, Mayor. And one of the marketing advantages we have of this site is the fantastic financial agreement that we have with the town, which locked in our tax rate for the next 30 years. Not only does that give the tenant some certainty as to their operating expenses, that allows us to push the rent a little bit further because of that certainty that we're giving the tenant. A lot of the competing sites around us do not have that type of tax program, or it's not as favorable as it is here, so it's one of the benefits of occupying this site. I think the other thing that we tell our tenants is that this is really unique. Having this amount of scale in a single location by a single owner in this submarket is really unheard of, especially recently. So for tenants that are growing, expanding, like Peloton, was when we signed the lease with them. One of the things that was appealing to them was the fact that there is, common ownership throughout the park, and if they needed to expand or contract throughout their lifetime, there was space available for them next door. And that, again, in markets like California's not a great example, but in the center of the country, in Texas, for example, it's not unusual to have a park development like this. In New Jersey, this is very unusual, and you won't find a whole lot of park developments in New Jersey that can offer that ability to expand and contract for tenants. So we'll be free and we're easy to find, but if there's any questions now, please just shout them out.
What's the asking rent?
What's the asking rent? Good question. So that is a great question.
Right. Well,
The last deal we signed in the park was around $19.50 per square foot. And just to give you an idea of how the rental market has changed since we acquired the site, the phase one deals that Bill was referring to were about $8 below that. So we, just in the course of about 2 years, we had almost double the rent growth in this location. I think part of that was, phase one was partially proving the concept here, right? One of the things, that scared people from this site before us, and to be clear, there was 6 other industrial developers that either had this site under contract or were talking with the previous owners before we got involved. We were the last guys to get involved, and we were either in the right place at the right time, or we just had the right skill set on the team to solve the problems of the site. Building that bridge that Bill mentioned was critical to kind of proving that this site could work from an access perspective. I think there was a lot of skepticism initially as to whether that bridge would solve the access problem here. And until we got our first batch of tenants in here and trucks flowing on that bridge, it was hard to convince people that our vision was correct. But now that you can see it and touch it and drive it yourself, that really juiced up our rents for the phase 2. And phase 3 will continue to push, but the market is, it is slowed down significantly this year. So one of the things I think is the benefit of this site from an ownership perspective is this is an awesome location, and it's one of the hardest markets, industrial markets in the entire country to find space, especially large-scale space. So while the center of the country and the southeast and certainly some parts of New Jersey are feeling a little bit of pain in the industrial world this year, we feel really confident that this site, because of its location, because of its unique attributes, because of the tax benefits, the drayage benefits, that we will largely be immune to any sort of slowdown in tenant requirements. And I think the speed at which the Samsung deal was done last year, right, that was light speed. I mean, I've never seen a lease get signed that quickly. This year it's taken a little longer, as you might expect. I don't expect to sign a lease in 30 days this year, but then again, I never expect that on any project, so that was an anomaly. Yes?
To add to that question, this is more of a comment slash question. So if the rents are more, it's more money for the city because our pilot is based on adjusted gross revenue, correct?
That is correct. So it's a win-win for both the landlord and the city when we get higher rents, because the way that the tax program works here is that it's a percentage of gross revenue that we generate off the building. So the higher rent that we generate, the higher taxes that the town generates, and it works out very fair for both parties. Despite that, it's still at a discount to ad valorem taxes, so there's still a benefit to our tenants who ultimately pay the tax bill, but it's, it is mutually beneficial to the town, the landlord, and the tenant. It's a great program.
Any sustainability initiatives that you guys designed into the base building?
You want to take this one?
Sure. Yeah, we're seeking LEED certification for all of the buildings. Every one of these buildings is set up to have a solar program put up on the roof, so we have the additional roof load allowance up there. But that's really open to a discussion with the tenant, right? We're waiting for that first generation tenant to come in before we're going to make that commitment. We are working on something which is going to help supply one of the uses in the town off of solar, a solar install that's going to be put up on the roof of one of these buildings. And again, we do seek LEED certification at a minimum inside all these buildings.
Motion sensing lights.
Yeah. That I was going to point that out. We actually ran around the warehouse before you guys came in to turn all the lights on, but they're on motion sensors. So that's pretty common in our buildings these days. But I think this doesn't count towards a LEED certification or anything like that. But the best thing we did environmentally for this site was built this, because previously it was there was a century of contamination here, and what we've done is we haven't eliminated the contamination, but we've contained it, right? So I think the most important thing we've done, and we don't get credit for this, like I said, on any sort of LEED or anything that anyone can, we can stick on a marketing flyer, but ultimately, really, that is the biggest benefit to the environment, is us building these buildings and containing the contamination. Yes?
40 feet is a lot higher than I see in my local market. I'm curious, is that a unique factor? Is it a differentiator for you, and how are tenants responding?
I wouldn't say it's a differentiator. I'd say a lot. Most, if not all, of the Class A buildings in North Jersey are 40 feet these days. It's kind of the highest we can go without putting in a specialized sprinkler system, for a lack of a more detailed explanation. It's certainly a benefit to us, and I think you'll see, if you walk through our tenant spaces, you'll see not all the tenants are using the full clear height, and not all the tenants would be necessarily willing to pay a premium for that clear height if they're not using it. Samsung, for example, is really heavy, really large equipment. It's dishwashers, dryers, that kind of thing. So using racking to store that kind of equipment is not so efficient. So what they do is they simply floor stack it. So they're using probably at max maybe 2/3 of the clear height. And they could certainly have taken a building with a lower clear height. So we certainly build it for some tenants that can use it. I'd say most tenants use it, but not all do. But the real reason why we invested in the extra clear height was for residual value. We think there's residual value in building it all the way up to the maximum height that we can for the next investor or the next tenant that comes in that might want to use it.
Well, in a time when tenants have choices, right? Well, you want to be able to check the box. If they're issuing you an RFP, you can't check the 40-foot clear box, you're out. So, you just want to be on par with the modern Class A product that's in the market.
Yep.
Explain how that's a benefit for tenants.
Yeah, sure. So there's basically two types of solar programs that we can take advantage of here in New Jersey. We can do a power purchase agreement, which is basically where we install exactly the amount of solar generation on the roof as the tenant can use, and the tenant buys the power directly from us at a discounted rate. Or there's a program in New Jersey called Community Solar, which allows us to sell the energy back to the grid. It's a complicated program. I don't have the brain power to explain it right now, but ask that guy. He knows his stuff.
There's your explanation after the presentation.
Yeah. Go see him.
Community solar, you sell the power to the community, so you're subscribing to local residents.
Exactly. So there's a bit of work that goes into it. So until we have a tenant in place for this building, we won't make a decision as to which program we're going to use, because we need to determine how much power is going to be used in this building and whether or not we can sell it directly to our tenant, which is a much more straightforward process than going through community solar. But as Bill alluded to, the buildings in this park are solar ready, meaning we invested in extra steel to be able to accommodate the weight of the solar on the roof and design the roofs in a way that could accommodate the solar. It just hasn't been installed and won't be installed until we get the building leased. I think I saw one more. Mike, yeah.
Did you say the site was accessible by rail?
It is technically, yes. So we have a rail. It's the reason we built the bridge in the first place is the chemical coastline that Bill alluded to is the name of a rail line that runs from the Port of Newark down to the end of the Tremley Point, which is the kind of little peninsula we're on here in Linden. That is a very active rail line. It carries hundreds of tanker cars a day, and it would stop and while it was reloading and offloading right in front of our site. And it would stop there for maybe 10-15 minutes at a time, which doesn't sound like a lot, but to a busy trucker, that's a lot of time to wait for a train to pass. So in order to overcome that, we built a bridge. Now, we could peel off that rail line and bring it into our buildings. There's another rail line that comes from this direction that we could reactivate. We could spend about $20 million to rebuild a bridge to reactivate that rail line if we needed to. And it is something we've marketed to our tenants, just haven't found the right one that needs it yet.
earmarking this as a single tenant space or multi-tenant? If the latter, how do you see demising working?
We designed this building to demise, and we designed most of the buildings in the park to be able to demise. Now, if you look at the leases we've signed so far, they're all single-tenant users. That's our preference. It's most people's preference to sign a single-tenant user, but we're certainly willing to divide this building, and we've issued several proposals on a divided basis right now. It does feel like at this moment in time the hot spot is around 150 to 200,000 feet. So a lot of the requirements we're seeing right now kind of fall within that range and require us to divide.
Yeah, this is one of those buildings we were talking about on the bus that has the trailer court. You can actually have separate points of ingress and egress on the trailer court side, and then this would be your office side where we have the office that's behind us, as well as 3 more storefronts with the ability to put in as many as 4 storefront offices into the building to divide this into as many as 4 tenants. Theoretically, it could always be divided into more, but we're thinking that probably 2 or 3 is very realistic for this building.
And not only design it in a way where there can be storefront entrances, but also design the truck court in a way where we can independently secure multiple truck courts by having multiple ingresses and egresses.
Yeah, the 350-foot depth is where we feel it's kind of like a sweet spot for a single-side load building. So you'll notice the cross-dock buildings are deeper, whereas these are, not as deep and long.
This is roughly 300, is that what you're saying?
350 feet. All of the cross-dock buildings in the park are 350 feet deep.
Single-side load.
I'm sorry, all the single-side load buildings.
The Peloton building is a cross-dock. That's where we're
Cross-dock,
heading next.
600.
I think that's 600, right?
So both Peloton and Samsung are 600 feet deep. Those are the larger buildings. And then the other cross-docks are in the 500-ish range.
Floor loading?
Floor loading is 800 pound per square foot loading, and that's really a function of the control modulus column design that we talked about on the bus, where we have those pile-like elements underneath of the floor. There's a lot of factors of safety that go into that, so there's probably the ability to exceed that in certain areas if it's well coordinated. And then if you get a really, really heavy load, like a mezzanine or something like that that's going to go in for e-commerce, sometimes what we'll do is we'll actually drive helical piles through the concrete slab on grade to support the foundations for those mezzanines. Believe it or not, that happens on sites, not even just sites with compressible organic fill, but we had a farm field in Logan Township, New Jersey, and we put in stone columns to support mezzanines for Target Corporation, just because of the immense amount of loads of some of those larger e-commerce mezzanines.
Yeah, and the site work on this site was a lot of work. We had to import quite a bit of fill, and the previous owners imported quite a bit of fill to bring the site above the flood elevation. I think the average raise was around 8 feet for the site, so that was a lot of fill to repurpose. One of the nice things about the site, given the level of contamination on site, we were able to bring in contaminated fill for the most part and cap it with some clean fill. But that saved us quite a bit of money in terms of the import. We didn't have to pay for clean fill. We actually got tipping fees for bringing it in. So,
quick question: did you have a vapor barrier, or was something volatile?
I can answer.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so vapor intrusion system. So the building is underlain by a layer of clean stone, as well as a vapor barrier, and then we have passive venting piping that goes, sucks air in and sends it to the roof. It has the ability to be made active if at any point in time we ever have any issues with indoor air sampling. The one nice part is, we were talking about a little bit on the bus ride, processed dredge material, which we have underlaying a lot of the buildings, is very fine material that when compacted, almost in and of itself acts the way that like clay would act. If you're familiar with landfills, you cap them with clay, right? Because they don't let gas get through. So that's helping. We're not counting that at all though. So every building has full passive venting system, then vapor barrier, and then the pipes to take the vapor out that have the ability to be made active. And we do sample the air quality, the air. David was mentioning that earlier. So, it's all taken care of that way. It's a good question. Probably have time for one more question, and I know Mayor wants to say something, and then after that, after the Mayor's remarks, we're going to ask everyone to come around the back and take one picture for NAOP to put on the website. Mike, you want to say something?
Sorry for asking, but electric charging stations?
Good question. So this building was started before the state had the requirements for make ready, but we have made ready a couple of the tenants in the park. The real reality on the electric charging is that it's hard enough to get the electric that we need to get from the power companies in New Jersey that the buildings want to use for the building's use. So while it is a really good goal to have a lot of electric charging, a couple of us drive electric cars, it's not quite ready yet to be rolled out in mass scale, especially for semi-trucks. We haven't seen any requirements in the park at all that have asked for electric fleet charging. We have had a couple of tenants that are going to do it for the automobiles.
And that said, we do expect electric fleets to come, and we expect them to come relatively quickly. Just because we haven't seen them here yet does not mean that they're not coming in the next year or two. But Matt's right. The utilities will hold us back from implementing that. And it's ironic, right? Because you look around this site, and we're surrounded by power generation facilities. All those smoke-generating smokestacks are generating lots of power, and I could throw a football and hit them from here. But getting power to this site is a lot more challenging than it looks. In addition to that, the utilities in general are just not prepared for the amount of power that they're going to have to give for battery recharging stations and electric car charging stations. And forget trucks, because trucks have a whole different need and a whole different capacity that they need for charging that, it's unfortunately our utilities are simply not prepared for it.
If I could have the Greek development and advanced realty folks all raise your hand in the back so everyone knows who you are. So as we're walking around Peloton and for the rest of the tour, the three of us, as well as all of these folks, are available to answer more questions, because I know some people probably have some more questions. I don't want to cut questions off necessarily, but we're all available. We'll be walking around with you together. A couple of us will be riding the bus back with you as well. And I think maybe we could have the mayor come up and say a couple words, and then we'll do our picture.
I don't know whether Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Linden. I don't know whether I should start off with 7 years ago. My grandfather wound up in this wonderful town called Linden, a few miles down the road on Southwood Avenue. They tell me when he landed here, he got an apartment on top of Kimmelman's Butcher Shop. That's how much, I got a lot of detail here. But I always say a poor boy from Southwood Avenue wound up being the mayor of this town. It's a great town, and as mentioned earlier, to some of you guys who were on the bus coming over, we take our developments in town very serious. We try to fast track as many things as we possibly can. This particular location, as mentioned earlier, was a contaminated site. So over the last, I'm a mayor now for 9 years. I'm going to say that we've been working on this thing for a good 12 years, trying to figure out what we could bring here. And we're just delighted to have Advanced Greek here. This location represents over $200 million in taxes over the next 30 years, which is incredible when you think about a location that was sitting here doing absolutely nothing. So I know my grandfather is very happy that we brought this site back to life. This particular location had fed many Armsteads, I'm happy to say. My grandfather was a father of 13 children, plus they adopted 2 more. So his job down here, it really carried us a long way, and we're just so happy to see the property being productive again. Again, $200 million in taxes, that's nothing to shake a stick at. And we've been utilizing the money. We are, I call it a political tear. We're probably the only town in Jersey which has lowered taxes for the last 7 years. Sometimes we only lower them by $14 a house. That's just enough for you to buy a Big Mac and a soft drink. But nonetheless, we haven't raised taxes, and we want to thank our developers who've come to town have made this all possible. And as they mentioned earlier, we are very, very development friendly here. We do not play. This is not a time for games. If somebody wants to come to our town and put something here that's worth it, we're going to be 100% behind them. Evidence of that is here. And if you look through the rest of the town, you'll see developments everywhere. This is just We've actually going to be the warehousing capital of the Northeast right here in Linden. I think we have between this location 4.5 million and some of the other, we've got almost 10 million square feet of warehousing right here in Linden. So we're on a tear here in town, and with this, thank you for coming here and investing your good hard-earned dollars in our town, and for generations to come, maybe there'll be a few more Armsteads gainfully employed. Thank you all.